Culture Wars here on Morning Kicker. I'm Robert. He's Jason. As we are steeped in the mire that is the international break, we have a little bit of time to reflect and look at the different styles of these national team coaches. And right here at home, Mauricio Pochettino and Jesse Marsch, two coaches very familiar with, obviously, United States and Canadian coaches, taking very different approaches to their communications with their teams. Pochettino, in press conference saying he doesn't call guys, people get called in, other people get left out. It is what it is. For Jesse Marsch, he's traveling, seeing these players, he's making visits, he's making calls, home visits, complete opposites. What do we think of these very different communication styles with these coaches that we're working with?
Yeah, just to give some background here, a couple of different pieces at The Athletic separated by 4 days. The first one on Mauricio Pochettino, written by Paul Tenorio and Henry Bushnell, titled, "For Mauricio Pochettino, communication void with USMNT players is a feature, not a bug." It then goes on to talk about how Pochettino never calls players to explain roster decisions. He doesn't communicate with them much at all outside of camps. The radio silence is a stark departure from what many U.S. players experienced under Greg Berhalter, the previous head coach, but it cuts to the core of Pochettino's managerial philosophy and USMNT rebuild. And here's the quote: "The players don't need to know," Pochettino said last week when he was asked why he doesn't explain his squad decisions. "Deep down, he believed they should already know why they were worthy or unworthy, and they should be, quote, desperate to perform, to grind, to convince us to call again." Then you have the Jesse Marsch piece, which came out just today, written by Joshua Cloak of The Athletic, a guy who covers Canadian soccer for that outlet. And he's got a lead with a little bit of an anecdote about Mathieu Chonier. I can't get my French in. It's not good. Mathieu Chonier. I think that's about as close as I'm going to get.
I'm glad you took that on.
Yeah, he went over. He was in Montreal. He was an MLS player. He went in an all-star team. He went over to play for Grasshoppers in Switzerland. He was battling an injury over there in Switzerland. Regular playing time became less of a sure thing. Chonier was also expecting his first child and experiencing many emotions that come from that drastic change to his life. Jesse Marsch's paternal instincts kicked in. He wondered if his young midfielder might be struggling. He texted him, "I'm coming to see you in Zurich." So Marsch traveled to Zurich, not to scout his player, but to spend time together over a meal. He wanted to better understand his midfielder's headspace. Chonier let out all of his emotions in front of his national team head coach. Talked about Marsch told Chonier going to Switzerland was tough for you, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really need to even read more of these stories to understand how very different these two approaches are to management in international football. And, of course, what's interesting for us as national team fans, as U.S. men's national team fans, is what it says in that article about how it was very different under Greg Berhalter. Berhalter very much was a Jesse Marsch-style head coach. He was an arm around the shoulder. He was a text message guy. He was commiserating with his team. There was that familial feel. In fact, they talked about the brotherhood during Berhalter's run as head coach. It seemed as though he was more their friend than their coach sometimes. Whereas Jesse,
for better or worse.
Whereas Mauricio Pochettino has come in and said, none of that works. We ain't doing none of that. You're not going to hear from me unless you're coming into the national team camp when you get your email that says you're coming. In fact, it is an email. It's not even a phone call from Pochettino. He doesn't pick up the phone and say, "Hey, you're into the national team." It is an email that says, "Here are your travel arrangements for you to join the national team camp." And I'm okay with that. Now, I definitely think it's you can be of the opinion that one approach is better than the other, right? You can just make a qualitative judgment and say the way that Berhalter does it is better than Pochettino, or Marsch does it is better than Pochettino, or the other way around, right? That is, you can make that decision. Nate saying, "I like Poch's approach personally." Now he says, "This is where I want to get. This is what I want to get to." I think Jesse's might be more effective for this generation. Okay, so this is the thing. Now, if you say in a general sense, generation meaning every player of this particular age group, maybe that's what Nate is saying, then you could argue Pochettino's approach is maybe not the right thing. I actually think that in terms of the maturation, and there are obviously players coming in and out and new players who have been added since Pochettino took over, and and those kind of things. But if you're talking about the general core of the U.S. men's national team, the ones who maybe didn't have enough accountability, the ones who maybe felt too comfortable in their position, and Pochettino had to figure out how to send a message that, no, you have to earn your spot. But that group, the one that went to the World Cup in 2022, maybe they needed a little bit more of the Greg Berhalter, Jesse Marsch style of management. But now, a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little less sensitive, Pochettino's way is the right way, because now it requires you to be accountable. Now it requires you to show up every camp. Now you are not going to be able to skate on a relationship that no longer exists because Greg Berhalter is no longer the coach. And that might be rationalizing on my part, right? Because I don't think Berhalter did a bad job those first 4 years. I don't think he should have gotten a second contract. I think that whole thing was a disaster, but I don't have a problem with what he did to build this team to where it was when the World Cup ended in 2022. You can argue about them getting out coached or being gassed against the Dutch. Those are in-game things that are certainly worthy of criticism. But in terms of the overall culture, I really didn't have a problem with it. But now here we are. It's pretty clear this group needed a wake-up call, and Pochettino is delivering it. But is Marsch wrong with the way he's doing Canada, Rob?
No, I don't think Marsch is wrong. I think coaching is one of those jobs where you can't make everyone happy. You're picking people over other people. You're making decisions for other people's lives and professional livelihoods, essentially. But I do like your point that the arm around the shoulder being in their lives was probably more important in the previous cycle when almost the entire team were youngsters and they were just getting their legs as professional soccer players. But now he's taken a more, stern and strictly professional approach to it. And he's ruffled the feathers of those folks that you say might have been comfortable. Some of the big stars, wanted to take time out, and they kind of had to earn their way back in. Other players, that always were a lock to get a call, weren't getting picked. And it seems like there's enough time, he's dealing with a kind of a shorter runway into the World Cup, but it does seem like injuries, notwithstanding, that all those players could potentially have the time to make good and come back to the team. But yeah. I think that Jesse Marsch's approach might burn some folks out. It's like, man, all right, I get it. You care about me, but you don't have to fly all the way across the world to be next to me. But
you're saying it's smothering. It's a little smothering.
It could be. Like I said, you can't please everybody. It could be like, thanks. A call would have been enough. Like to say, like, hey, thinking about you going through a tough time, but like, why are you like at my house now, boss?
I definitely think, and this is interesting for Bernardo, right? So now it feels like you're almost obligated to call up Chonier, because why did you go to Switzerland if you're not going to call the guy up?
Right.
You got a roster. If he's healthy and he's playing and he's getting minutes with his club, and then you don't call him up, but you went over and flew over. I mean, maybe that.
The example. Okay, so use Gio Reyna as an example. Someone that's on the outside looking in, he's having a tough time. Berhalter goes and visited him, and then doesn't, call him up later on, or switch that name for Pochettino. But at the same time, Gio or any other player that's on the outside looking in, they didn't get the call. You're like, I need to get better, so I get the call. You probably don't need all the access. He's basically in that press conference saying, like, you just don't know what you're doing then if you don't know why you didn't get the call. I think as professionals, you got to know how to get better. Well, and if you're not that aware of your own game, then you're not in the conversation.
This is probably not the right framing exactly, but it definitely feels like one is more of an old school approach and one is a more of a new agey approach, right? And again, Berhalter was all wrapped up in this leadership culture. He's taking lunches with CEOs to talk about how to lead men and all this stuff. And I always thought it was pretty ridiculous. I always thought it was making way more complicated a thing that is ultimately pretty simple at the end of the day. And you justify yourself, particularly when you're in a national team job and you have a lot of time on your hands, you justify yourself by diving into all of these like philosophies on leadership and stuff. And I don't know that that's what Jesse is doing necessarily, but there definitely feels like that. Like you're almost keeping yourself busy, because otherwise, what are you doing? Like we as human beings.
Is he the nosy neighbor then? Is he the nosy neighbor?
I just think it's a matter of, just if you don't, Jesse Marsch is the kind of guy who wants to be active, because if he doesn't feel active, it's like he's not worth anything or he's not doing his job. So what is the job? Where's the job end? For Jesse Marsch, the job includes flying to Zurich to see Mathieu Chonier. For Mauricio Pochettino, it does not involve any of that. In fact, he believes the job is to leave the players alone while they're in their club team, and then when it's time to call them up, look at where they are in their club and call them up. And that's what the national team is supposed to be. And remember that this is much more of a cultural divide, because Pochettino is it's not just old school, it's South American, right? The culture of South America is much more like what Pochettino is doing than what, a modern approach where you're putting your arm around a shoulder. And again, maybe I'm just more inclined to that kind of, there's a divide between coaches and players. There is an accountability that comes from being asked by your coach to play well enough to demand a spot in the team that I don't ever recall. I mean, I didn't play high school sports, Rob, but I don't ever recall going to my coach and like having a deep, heartfelt conversation over my playing time. I was just angry I wasn't playing, and then realized that if I wanted to play, I have to go and prove to the coach I deserve to play. Right. I don't know. I mean, again, that's not what Chonier is doing. He's not whining about his playing time to Marsch. Marsch is taking the step to go and have that conversation. Again, I don't know that it's bad. I just prefer what Pochettino is doing.
I think that also the approach that Marsch is taking it's probably tough to step back when the inevitable end, when he leaves the job. Like, where do you leave those relationships? Or is Poch's, cut and dry, non-communication an indication that he's not going to be around for long-term relationships? And, we're doing the job now until the World Cup, and then I'm gone. And building those long-term relationships is a waste of time if you're not going to be in a long-term working relationship.
We also have to be very careful about analyzing the way a culture operates based on the results, and then kind of, reverse engineering. Oh, the U.S. wasn't very good because Berhalter had this culture, or the U.S. was losing games and failing at points because the U.S. had this culture. While that's possible, I don't know that you can prove that, right? So then it's like, okay, well, do we have to like go to the opposite end of the spectrum? And I'm not sure Pochettino was hired for that reason, but he goes to the opposite end of the spectrum. If they win, people are going to say, oh, it's because of the culture change. But again, it's kind of not a thing you can actually prove. But I definitely think it's reasonable to believe that when you are acting the way that Marsch is, or the way that Berhalter did, you do create this sense among the players that, oh, I'm his guy, and he's going to call me up all the time, and I'm just in this team now. I've made this team, and I'm done making this team, and I don't have to think about making this team anymore. And that's clearly a message Pochettino doesn't want to send. And absolutely, that's okay. And you should be. I think competition does make players better, and it does force players to raise their game if they want to be in a World Cup team, for example. So here we go.
Here we go, indeed. Thank you, everyone who's chimed into the show today. I had a funny one here this morning on Friday. At least I didn't call you Davis Jason, or was it?
I think it was Javis is what you called me.
Javis. Classic Javis behavior there. But I do want to shout out this week's new MK Ultras once again. Victor Castro Lopez, Andy Arriaga, Mark DeBlois, Eric Wilkerson, and just this morning at the beginning of the show, Thomas Dupree. Thank you for joining into the movement. Thank you for assisting us in dotting the map and being right along here for the fun here on Morning Kick Around.
Thank you very much. Always incredible to have new members joining to continue to dot the map and grow the community is what we live for. It's what we live for, Rob.
Yeah, we got a fun weekend ahead. We got some national team games, U20 games, and some great guests next week, and some big videos coming out for us too. We got some announcements, videos, some guests, great stuff on next week's show. Thank you everyone for tuning in, all your comments, and good old Javis, Dason, and Covert Rur, according to the chat. I like that. Chris Sow, nailing it. Thanks as always. Kick the line button, all that stuff. We'll see you next time. Until Monday, enjoy your soccer.